Hey guys, what's going on? We're doing predictions for UFC Fight Night 121, Werdum versus Tybura. Follow me on Twitter. My link is in the description at MMA Breakdown 0. Coming off of a strong night for me, Fight Night 120, Poirier versus Pettis. Went 10 for 13 on fantasy, moved up to 421 overall for the year. And it's the second event in a row that I've made money on, which is a new record for me now. Embarrassing to admit. Started betting back in June, and this is my first win streak, but it's okay. I feel really positive and good about it. It's been a long process to get here, but I feel like we're finally turning the ship around, and just always gathering information, always trying to be more intelligent, more disciplined, and at least for 2 events now it's paid off. So I'm hoping that we can continue this trend, make some more money to close out the year. But yeah, I'm happy about that, feel good about it. I always want to be completely transparent with you guys, so even though that's kind of an ugly truth to admit that I've only profited on I've only been able to make money on 2 consecutive events for the last 6 months. I want to be honest about it, but at the same time, I feel like it was a good learning process, and now I know a lot more, and I'm a lot more disciplined than I was when I started. I went with the picks that I exactly advised you guys about in my video. Strickland and Northcutt, parlayed them both. Got slightly above even odds on that parlay, and I made a few other very small bets which I lost, but basically doubled my money. So that was a nice little bet, and I'll tell you right off the top of the card, for this event I'm not going to advise making any bets. I'll probably still make some very minimal ones, probably a parlay of only 2 fighters, I think. But as far as significant bets, I'm advising against it on this card. I don't like anything. I think part of being a good investor in any field is knowing when not to take advantage of an opportunity, knowing when to walk away, and passing on a potential opportunity to make money. And I'm just not seeing anything on here that I feel really good about, and I'm trying to be a risk-averse bettor. So yeah, I don't have any big plays for you guys on this card. Alright, first fight on the Fight Pass prelims at heavyweight, Shawn Colter versus Tuivasa. I feel like Coulter should be the favorite on paper. A much more in shape heavyweight than Tuivasa. Probably a more complete striker. He's a slugger. Seems like he's got knockout power. Coming off of a somewhat competitive fight with Chase Sherman. He was basically fighting on one leg by the end of it, and still was threatening the knockout, but ended up getting knocked out himself. Yeah, I feel like he's the logical pick here. All signs are kind of pointing towards him to get the win, but something about him, and especially getting stopped cold by Chase Sherman, indicates to me that he's not really made to pick up wins at the UFC level. And Tuivasa looks like a really sloppy headhunter, a pretty out of shape heavyweight, but I just kind of have a feeling that he's gonna have the better chin here. If Coulter was the only guy to get knocked out by Sherman, who's not a great finisher, and I think these guys are just going to slug it out. And even though Tuivasa is more out of shape and more sloppy with his striking, I just feel like he'll probably have that durability and the endurance to withstand Coulter's attack, and probably end up coming out on top. just kind of an X factor thing I'm feeling with him. So I'm going to go with Tuivasa, the newcomer, but a totally risky pick, I think. And like I said, not really going to be making any big bets for anything on this card, but especially this fight at heavyweight, two kind of questionable guys. Would definitely stay away from this one. Next fight at flyweight, Lausa versus Eric Shelton. This is pretty interesting. Shelton, I think, is definitely the better athlete and should have more of a complete game, more tools to win this. He's a decent striker, decent grappler, but man, he just has a real problem pulling the trigger. Really cost him in his last fight against Jared Brooks. And he had moments in that fight where he was able to catch Brooks coming in, caught him with a jab, I believe in the third round, that staggered him. But other than that, just threw very little, let Brooks close the distance pretty much at will and hit takedowns on him. And I just feel like even though he should be the better athlete here, he's the prospect with more of an upside. I just feel like Lausa is going to throw his hands more and go for it more. He hasn't been really that impressive at all. He got an okay win against Yao Zakai in his debut. Showed off some decent striking ability. And then his fight with Magomed Bibulatov, I thought wasn't all that bad. Actually made Bibulatov really work to get takedowns. Was able to stuff most of them, but once it got on the ground, got dominated and held down. And I don't think Shelton is that proactive with his wrestling. I don't think he's that committed to throwing strikes on the feet. So I just feel like Lausa is going to offer up more offense, more volume here, and win a decision. But again, that's a pretty close one, but I'll go with Lausa by decision. And women's strawweight, Alex Chambers versus Nadia Kassem. I was only able to find one fight of Kassem's on YouTube, and she ran over her opponent in, I think, under a minute. It was real short, maybe even 30 seconds. But in that fight, she was able to back her opponent up against the fence and just dominate her with knees and clinch strikes. She seems like a dangerous, athletic Muay Thai striker. And, her opponent was probably, really low level of opposition. But I feel like a super, well, not a super athlete, but a pretty good athlete who can strike fairly well is probably enough to get by Alex Chambers, who's tough, can pull out submissions when she's down and getting beat up like she did against Kylan Curran. But at the same time, there's nothing about Chambers' game that's really impressive or even really suggests that she belongs in the UFC. I mean, just getting dominated by Paige Van Zandt and making Van Zandt look like a real contender at the time. In hindsight, it's not a good look. And she just seems to allow her opponents to overwhelm her with offense and volume and pressure. Kassem seems to have that, so I'm going to take Kassem even though it's her debut and there's very little footage to go off of. Her only fight being against probably a very questionable level of opposition. But I feel like she's enough of an athlete and probably has enough skill on the feet to throw enough, land enough shots to overwhelm Chambers, at least for a decision, if not finisher. So I'm going to take Kassem, but again, I recognize that that's a risky one. A newcomer who only has one fight out there to go off of, and Chambers is a dangerous submission player, but I still like Kassem. All right, onto the FS1 prelims at a welterweight, Damian Brown versus Frank Camacho. I was liking Frank Camacho going into this. Felt that he was the more natural boxer, probably more power than Brown. And Brown's been chinny, you know, especially after his last fight, just getting put out cold by Vince Pichel. And also, I think got dropped by Cesar Arzamendia. And John Tuck got some big shots, big ground and pound shots off on him very early in their fight when he had him on his back against the fence. But with that being said, I rewatched Camacho's fight with Li Jingliang, and while he started off really strong, was able to crack Jingliang on the feet. He seemed to pretty quickly run out of things to do once he wasn't able to get that that early knockout and was forced to fight a more complete game. Jingliang started to get his rhythm with more precise strikes and was able to get tie-ups with him on the feet and in the clinch against the fence. And I just feel like Brown is the more creative striker, varies up his strikes pretty well. And John Tuck, even though what cost him that fight more than anything against Brown, I think was just his hesitancy, lack of pulling the trigger. But John Tuck's a serious athlete, and you know, we saw that after the Brown fight when I think he beat, who did he beat? Was it Takanori Gomi? But, you know, Tuck's I feel, you know, a more superb athlete, a much more proven, legit fighter at the UFC level than Camacho. And Brown was able to pull out the win against him. So I'm going to go with Brown here, even though he's chinny. I just think he varies up his strikes enough, and he's able to come back from being down, being hurt early in fights, and kind of find his opponent's weaknesses and outwork them. So going with Brown by decision, but it's a dangerous one. Camacho has power. I think a better combination boxer. Brown being chinny, you know, that could result in Brown being knocked out in the first round. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm going to go with Brown by decision. All right, at heavyweight, Anthony Hamilton versus Adam Wieczorek. This fight was supposed to take place a couple of events ago, whenever it was, and I took Wieczorek then, still taking him now. I don't know how anyone can really reasonably make a case for Hamilton. I mean, you can compare their skills and the style matchup here, but I think the writing's on the wall that Hamilton, his chin is just totally shot, and physically he can't compete at all at heavyweight. I mean, you know, getting knocked out by Marcel Fortuna in the first round and getting knocked out even quicker against, what's the guy's name? Daniel, I can't remember the guy's name, but his last fight where he got knocked out in the first round. Neither of those guys were knockout strikers before then, and both identical, you know, first round knockouts, especially his last one, you know, just right out of the gate, the guy just cracks him, and he just goes down easily. I don't think he has the chin. Physically, I think he's shot. Wieczorek, there's a fight of his out there that you can find on YouTube against Cisse, and he was just getting beat on early. You know, totally dominated on the feet. I think he was put on his back, but just getting crushed. Managed to survive that storm. Hung on, came back, I think got mount and pounded the guy out. So he's tough, maybe a slow starter. He also has some quick first round submission wins where he, you know, didn't come out of a deficit in the first round, just was able to get the finish right away. But, you know, I think there's a slight window there for Hamilton, who's a big puncher and really likes to go after guys early. and really put his weight and strength on people against the fence. I think there's a small window for him to try to blitz Wieczorek, but I mean the guy's only wins are against who's the Russian guy he knocked out, and then you know, other than that, cage grinded Daniel Omielanczak. You know, a very unimpressive win against Ruin Potts early in his career, and other than that is just getting knocked out cold by guys. So I think Hamilton might come out here really strong against Wieczorek, try to get him against the fence, drag him to the ground, but I think he's just going to end up tiring himself. Wieczorek's going to be able to come back and probably find his way to mount and pound him out. So I'm going to go with Wieczorek. I think he definitely gets the stoppage. I think he could get either a submission or a TKO. But Hamilton, to me, just seems done. I honestly don't think he can compete anymore. So got to go with Wieczorek there. And that is one of the fights that I will be placing a bet on. At lightweight, Will Brooks versus Nik Lentz, another matchup that was supposed to take place several events ago, and I took Will Brooks then, and still taking him here. I feel he's the higher level, more well-rounded fighter than Nik Lentz. Maybe not well-rounded in the sense that he's going to attack as much as Nik Lentz with both his striking and wrestling, and really transition between them well, but just an overall more complete fighter in the sense that he can hit the big takedown at the right time, or he can capitalize on a position like when he took the back of Alex Oliveira standing, or just land the more significant shots at the right time. I definitely think Lentz is the more offensively active fighter here. Will probably throw more volume and look to press a wrestling game. But I think Brooks is the better athlete, has faced higher level fighters between his Bellator and, well, not his UFC run, but in Bellator. And I just think we'll have the better range control. Yeah, will be more athletic and can probably pick better shots than Lentz, who's probably just going to try to, you know, brute force his way to a victory here. And we've seen more skilled guys like Islam Makhachev, really skilled grappler, just totally pretty much dominate the grappling against Lentz. And, you know, other than that, you really have to struggle to tell me who Lentz's biggest win is against. I mean, you look at his resume: Michael McBride, Danny Castillo, Manny Gamburian. Those are his last 3 wins. So, yeah, I have to go with Will Brooks. I think he's going to win a decision. But at the same time, you know, Brooks, his UFC career has not panned out for him. I think he's really suffered from physically not being able to compete with guys, especially at lightweight, you know, against Oliveira, both Oliveiras, and just doesn't offer up enough offense to win decisions convincingly. I thought he even lost the Pearson fight. So if he just never gets off and finds his rhythm, I could see Lentz just outboxing him and attempting takedowns, doing that enough to win a decision. But I do think he's going to get that opening to either take the back of Lentz, get some good control time, or hurt him with a shot, you know, something of that nature. So I'll go with Brooks, but certainly not a lock. All right, at flyweight, Ryan Benoit versus Ashkan Moktarian. I think Benoit should be able to win this, just being a better, more aggressive striker. I think he should overwhelm Mokhtarian with his pretty wild boxing game. But Benoit's still pretty unstructured, and and he struggled against guys who can either, you know, match or exceed his skill on the feet, or put him on his back. You know, even in the Freddie Serrano fight, which Benoit just was able to kind of overwhelm with boxing, he still got taken down in that fight. Serrano had some big slams on him, and Mokhtarian, while he is he looks very green, very raw, and you know, between his Moraga fight and the few fights of his I was able to research before the Moraga fight, pre-UFC, looks like a guy who has almost zero striking capability and just looks to kind of run forward, get his hands on guys, and just drag them down to the mat, and from there just get control time and outwork them on the ground. So I could see him possibly getting takedowns on Benoit, who's so wild and reckless that you know, he could very well leave that opening for Mokhtarian to time a takedown on. But at the same time, I can't ignore the lack of striking ability Mokhtarian seems to have. I mean, in that Moraga fight, I don't know if he landed one strike in that fight. You know, he was totally dominating, kept going for takedowns that Moraga was able to stuff, and then he was able to get on top of him and attempted several arm bars and just you know, controlled him on the ground pretty easily. It just seems like a pretty low level, low skill fighter to me. You know, while Benoit is not, you know, really a technical marvel, I think just with enough offense and enough striking aggression, he can outbox Mokhtarian for the decision. So that's what I'm going with. But, you know, Benoit's been finished by a Ben win. Brandon Moreno really outclassed him on the feet, and then so did Pettis, and then he gives up those takedowns like he did to Serrano. I think Moreno also took him down. I just don't feel it's really a safe pick, but at the same time, the logical one. All right, on to the main card on FS1 at featherweight. We have a TBD here. Alexander Volkanovski versus TBD was supposed to be, I can't remember the original opponent at this point, but his replacement was supposed to be Humberto Bandone, and I was really looking forward to that, and probably would have taken advantage of a bet there. Bandone, a long striker, good kicker, and dangerous off of his back, and came off of a really nice knockout win where he, I think it was going for a knee, one of those knee strikes that kind of became an errant head kick and knocked out Martin Bravo. Really liked that. And Volkanovski, a very aggressive fighter, really goes after guys with his striking and wrestling, and has pretty relentless ground and pound, but I think pretty limited. And I thought that Bandone was either going to get a submission off of his back or catch him with something on the feet, since he is pretty long for the division. Anyways, we don't know who he's facing, so we'll just have to move on from that one. But at middleweight, Elias Theodorou versus Dan Kelly. This is a pretty compelling matchup, I think. I feel like Theodorou is just too young and athletic here for Kelly to really get anything meaningful done against. You know, Theodorou, he's a decent wrestler and grappler, although we haven't seen that from him in some time, and Tavares was able to kind of nullify that game. But I felt like he would be athletic enough to get takedowns on Kelly, or at least find his way into the clinch and cage grind him like he did to Sam Alvey, and really avoid any exchanges on the feet. Theodorou is also really tough, which kind of, to me, negates the possibility of Kelly catching him or really getting to him with his offense, with his striking. you know, the only time that he was, and not even really in danger of being finished, but just really kind of wearing damage was against Elias Theodorou, or the Brazilian guy Thiago Santos a couple years ago, where he was just getting his shots stuffed and just getting lit up on the feet, eating knees from the clinch. But he still kept coming and still kept going for takedowns, still engaging Santos. So he's a really tough guy. And other than that, really hasn't been in danger at all in any of his fights. But on the flip side of that, he really doesn't have much of a striking game. You know, against Alvey, like I already mentioned, just try to close the distance, find his way into the clinch. So if Kelly's able to get space and time to work, you know, he's the much more consistent, proactive boxer, even if his technique is pretty poor. And we've seen him be able to surprise guys like Carlos Jr., you know, one of the craziest comebacks and finishes I've ever seen in MMA. And, you know, on the ground, he has the judo background. He can be strong there. He can hold guys down from top position. But I just feel like he's at a real athletic disparity. You know, he was exposed against Brunson on the feet. Even Carlos Jr., you know, took him down right away and had his back for the entire first round. Theodorou's not, you know, as slick a finisher. Doesn't really get in those positions to finish the fight, but I just think he has enough pace and is durable enough to kind of withstand anything Kelly throws at him and just continue to throw and outland Kelly. I think he's going to get a decision that way. So I like Theodorou by decision, but, you know, there is that possibility that Kelly clips him or takes him down and is able to beat on him from top position. I think it's pretty unlikely, but, you know, it could happen. The Kelly win over Carlos Jr. to me was way more shocking than a win over Theodorou would be. So, you know, it's possible, but I like Theodorou for a decision. All right, at welterweight, Jake Matthews versus Boyan Velickovic. This one's real interesting too. And, you know, again, this is why I'm not advising guys to make any big bets on this card. A lot of really competitive matchups. But Matthews versus Velickovic, if this is the Matthews that we've seen in his couple of fights before his layoff against Kevin Lee and Andrew Holbrook, who just seemed lost and, you know, couldn't get any offense going really on the feet and, you know, couldn't really establish his takedown game, then I think Velickovic is tactical enough, strategic enough to pick him apart on the feet, kind of, with leg kicks. And he can hit takedowns as well. I think he's a pretty capable grappler. You know, had a back-and-forth fight with Michael Graves. Took down DiCirico right at the end of, I think, the first round in their fight, and immediately was able to lock up the Kimura in transition, and, you know, had that right at the end of the round as the bell sounded. But I think he's, you know, if Holbrook could give Matthews enough problems on the ground, I think Velickovic could hang with him there. But I think Matthews, I'm expecting him to kind of fix whatever problems were going on with his game, kind of return to the guy who is really on a hot streak and looking really impressive against talented guys like Johnny, what's the guy's name? Johnny Case, Akbar Areola, you know, being this really high-powered, aggressive boxer who, you know, gets these takedowns and then just crushes guys with ground and pound and opens up opportunities for submissions. I'm expecting that guy to come back here because those performances against Lee and especially against Holbrook were really kind of disappointing, and I just thought such a a stark contrast from, you know, the guy we saw before that point. And Velichkovich, you know, he showed some good leg kicks against Till and had that late knockout against Masoke, but was getting dominated pretty much in that Masoke fight on the feet before that point. Still not a guy who really just, you know, has enough offensive ability to just dominate you or to set up a knockout strike or even dominate you with wrestling. He's just kind of okay throughout a fight in certain positions, and Matthews is much more to the point, straightforward with his boxing, his wrestling, and I'm expecting him to take down Velickovic here, outwork him on the ground, get enough control time, enough top position time, maybe not finish, but yeah, I'm expecting a better Matthews here, so I'm going to take him by decision. All right, at welterweight, Tim Means versus Belal Muhammad. This is another really competitive matchup, I think. Really close on paper. I think pretty much a striker versus wrestler matchup. Belal Muhammad striking, you know, I thought it was promising in his debut fight against Alan Jouban, but since then hasn't really developed, I think, to be a real weapon or anything that impressive. You know, got knocked out brutally by Vicente Luque, and even against Jordan Meehan in his last fight was eating some shots early. Tim Means, as crafty as he is on the feet, as long as he is, and as sneaky as he is with his clinch strikes, with, you know, elbows and strikes from close range, I think it's a very dangerous fight for Muhammad in those positions. You know, being a little chinny, he could get knocked out. But Means has not impressed me lately ever since his first fight with Alex Oliveira, which I thought was probably the best performance of his career. And if it wasn't for that controversial knee, would have, you know, picked up a really impressive win there. But in the rematch against Oliveira, just looked like he was totally unprepared for that. I thought looked kind of out of shape, but just athletically didn't look like he was ready to compete with Oliveira, who just dominated him both on the feet and with the wrestling, got the submission win, and followed it up with kind of a stinker against Alex Garcia. Alex Garcia, a guy who we've seen you know, be put out before. I think Strickland just knocked him out before that fight. But more than that, just a guy who really can't pull the trigger and is, you know, really a defensive fighter, and Means just kind of barely was able to outpoint him and outstrike him with his jab. That kind of hesitant Means, I think, can get outworked, can get out-wrestled by Muhammad. You know, like I said, in the rematch against Oliveira, got dominated in the wrestling department, and that was always kind of his weakness throughout his UFC career, even before he got cut, you know, when he lost to Danny Castillo and Jorge Masvidal, and then even after he came back when he fought John Howard. Howard hit some big takedowns on him early in that fight. Muhammad's not very athletically gifted fighter, but a pretty consistent wrestler, and I just have to pick that consistency over the more lethal striker here, who hasn't, you know, shown that striking in a little while now. So I'm gonna go with Muhammad to hit takedowns, outwork Means, but I think Muhammad is hittable enough and chinny enough that, you know, it makes this a very close competitive fight. So that's a tough one, but I'm going with Muhammad by decision. All right, women's flyweight, Bec Rawlings versus Jessie Rose Clark, newcomer, and this one's going to upset a lot of people, but I don't care. I upset people last week when I picked Ansaroff, and you know, we saw how that one turned out. But I'm going to take Jessie Rose Clark here, who's not some hot prospect, really doesn't do anything that special. but she's just consistent, and I think a more composed, more technical striker than Rawlings. I think she has better form, works, more effective, more sound combinations than Rawlings. Works a jab, and Rawlings, while she's definitely the higher output fighter here, the more aggressive fighter, will come forward more and really pressure her. I think Rawlings is still just kind of a little sloppy with her technique, and just kind of overall a little basic. I think her game's really just predicated on her aggression, her kind of doggedness. But yeah, I'm going to take Clark for those reasons. She won a decision against Karina Dam and then lost a decision against some other female fighter that I wasn't aware of in her recent fights. But, Rawlings getting jump kick KO'd by Paige Van Zandt, that's ugly. And I didn't even think she convincingly won her fight against Seo Hee Ham. Torres really outboxed her pretty soundly, and while Clark, maybe doesn't have the pop behind her punches like Torres, definitely not the technical refinement of someone like Torres, or even Van Zandt probably. I think just working that consistent jab, being pretty measured and composed with her striking, I think that could be enough against Rawlings. So, I like going with more technical, more composed fighters. I'm going with Rose Clark by decision. Almost certain she's going to open as a big underdog, but Rawlings to me just doesn't seem like she's making any real improvements in her game. She's just kind of being more aggressive and just kind of trying to make more out of the same kind of unrefined striking game. So Jessie Rose Clark, but I know that's a super risky pick, but it's what I'm going with. All right, main event at heavyweight, Fabricio Werdum versus Marcin Tybura. I feel like Werdum, I feel like this was a similar test to the Walt Harris fight. Tybura's a talented and dangerous long-range striker, but what he offers there, he's probably gonna he probably lacks the early offense that someone like Harris or even a Brown would have offered. Tybura's a slow starter. You saw it in the Enrique fight. Not so much in the Arlovsky fight, but after taking Arlovsky down and dominated him on the ground, when Arlovsky got back up at the end of the first round, Tybura seemed a bit winded. Arlovsky got some shots off on him that kind of scared him off a little bit. And yeah, I just feel like being a slow starter, Werdum will probably have that opportunity to take him down right off of the bat like he did to Harris, and probably submit him from there. But even on the feet, as long as it doesn't become an extended striking affair over several rounds where they don't go to the ground at all and Tybura just gets all the time to read and figure out Werdum, I think Werdum can still land shots on him. Verdum's a pretty talented striker himself. He hurt Alistair Overeem, had those two pretty dominant wins against Brown, and he's got power. I could see him putting out Tybura, and I don't see why Tybura would be able to stop the takedown either. Luis Enrique really pressured him early, got him in the clinch, was able to drag him to the mat. And Tybura has shown some good grappling skills, being able to take the back and outposition guys on the ground like he did to Arlovsky, but I don't see him doing that to Werdum at all, who's one of the supreme grapplers in all of MMA. And I think Werdum's really getting his head right after that Miocic loss. I was concerned about him going into the Harris fight, but seemed like, you know, there were no shenanigans there. He did exactly what he needed to do, didn't mess around, and got Harris down, submitted him with ease. Feel like he could do the same to Tybura, especially if Tybura is willing to engage him on the ground, as you know, he did to Arlovsky and Reek as well. But the only thing about Werdum is still that Miocic loss. You know, it was so bizarre and such a low IQ game plan that you know, you kind of worry about him if he's forced to strike for too long, and especially at range. That's where Tybura is very dangerous, and you know, I can't just erase that performance from my memory, even though I think he's trying to make up for that and kind of did right the ship against Harris. So, you know, maybe a slightly tougher test than Harris, but I still think it's a guy that Werdum can implement his ground game on from the outset and outclass on the ground. So I'm going with Werdum by submission. I think early he could definitely knock him out as well. So, yeah, I like Werdum by finish, but, you know, until Werdum gets another streak going here. And even the, you know, Overeem fight, even though he came back, he was still getting outstruck from range and got dropped in that fight. So, you know, he's still a questionable guy, and you can't be too confident about him. But those are my picks, and like I said, not advising any significant bets on this card, but I'm probably going to just make a very small bet on a two-fighter parlay here of probably Werdum inside the distance as well as Wieczorek inside the distance. I think both of those guys can win either by submission or knockout, so I wouldn't bet on either of those methods of finishing, but definitely inside the distance for both of them. Hopefully you can get close to even odds on those, but even that, you know, I wouldn't make a big bet on. It's just kind of a small one, just to kind of take a chance at least getting some return on this card. But overall, I think it's I think the entire card is filled with pretty competitive matchups that could go either way. Some other ones, you know, depending on the odds that I might look to take advantage of, maybe Kassem, Jessie Rose Clark, I'm certain will be the underdog, but you know, she could very well lose. So you know, maybe Janelle Lausa, but you know, those are all kind of risky bets. You know, a lot of unknown fighters on this card. So yeah, Werdum and Wieczorek inside the distance, a parlay there. Maybe looking to place a small bet on that, but other than that, I think this one should kind of be bypassed for betting. And you know, even the next card I don't like so much, but I'm really looking forward to that 218 card. I think you know, we should save our money, put our money away, save our winnings, and go big on that one, because there are a lot of big opportunities there, I think. But yeah, bet responsibly. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week with my video for Fight Night Bisping versus Gastelum. Thanks, guys. Bye.